We're here to talk about this very important advocacy work you're involved in, and I'm curious, how did you get connected to the Innocence Project and helping this cause?
Right. Well, in 2001, my wife, Jane, was watching, I think it was 60 Minutes, I can't remember, but it was a news show, and there was a piece about a man who had just been released from prison named Kenny Waters, whose sister, Betty Ann, had become an attorney just to try and get him out. And I was fascinated by this story and was deeply moved by the fact that someone had committed. Kenny was in jail for 18 and a half years. They were poor and uneducated. She'd never finished 10th grade. And she fought and went back to law school and became an attorney. And with the help of Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld and the Innocence Project, finally got him exonerated on DNA evidence. And I was just blown away by the faith and love that that sister had for her brother, much like Marvin's mom.
Right, yeah.
You know, and she just refused to believe that he was guilty. And so I decided to make a movie about it. And we made this movie called Conviction, which came out 2 years ago. And
with Hilary Swank.
With Hilary Swank and Sam Rockwell. And yeah, so it took a while to get the movie off the ground. But meanwhile, I just was constantly knocked out by the work that the Innocence Project was doing, and realized how critically important it was. And I didn't know, you know, like Marvin said about before he went to prison. I just kind of assumed as an American, I had an innate pride in our justice system and in democracy, and felt like, well, if someone gets thrown in jail, they probably did something.
As you mentioned, Betty Ann Waters was really remarkable to put herself through law school, so committed and devoted to proving her brother's innocence. And she was successful.
She was, yeah. She just never gave up, nor did she ever doubt for a day that Kenny was innocent. And I think in many ways, Kenny, her brother, inspired her to keep going, because she didn't know if she could pull this off. She didn't know if she could even get into law school. You know, we had a benefit the other night for the Innocence Project, and I was saying, we now have the ability, because of social media, to amplify our voices. You know, and so often as American citizens, we feel like, well, I'm just one person, what can I do? Well, the past couple of years, as one person, you can do an insane amount simply by logging onto Twitter and adding @innocence to your Twitter feed and retweeting the tweets that you get. They're fascinating, the stories are moving, the articles will blow your mind, but just that, if everyone in this room did it, you know, not to mention your audience, you know, on television, you'll make a huge difference.
As you mentioned, the Innocence Project hosted a benefit the other night. You were honored for your advocacy work, and Peter Neufeld is an attorney. He's one of the co-founders of the Innocence Project, along with Barry Scheck. And Peter, how important is it for movies like Conviction to be made so that people are aware that this problem exists?
When you tell a powerful story the way that Tony did in Conviction, and you reach out to hundreds of thousands of people that way, you move them, and you move them in a way that statistics just don't do it.
So what kind of reforms need to be made in the justice system? I know this is only an hour show, but you know, it seems to me it's not enough to overturn convictions. We need to put a system in place that doesn't send people like Marvin to prison for 15 years.
So you want to improve the way they do eyewitness identifications, so they don't use a color picture of somebody. You know, the other thing that was left out of Marvin's story, which is just so incredible, is the real perpetrator, Otis Lincoln. His picture was in the array, but the police officer was so suggestive and so sure that it was Marvin that he convinced the woman to pick out Marvin instead of the real perpetrator. So you want him to do identification procedures in a fair and honest way to prevent that from happening. You want to prevent police from interrogating people unless it's videotaped, so there'll be a neutral record. Simple things like that are good for preventing wrongful convictions, and they're good for public safety.
And has this changed your view of the criminal justice system? And I wonder if it's changed your view of the death penalty, because it does make you think twice about people who've been wrongly convicted, who are on death row. And in some cases, you wonder how many Marvins are out there waiting to be put to death.
Someone, I mean, yes, it did change my opinion of the justice system, but in a sense where it made me feel that I needed, as I mentioned before, take responsibility. That really is the thing. 'Cause it's one thing to complain and to be shocked, and it's another to say, you know, we live in a democracy of checks and balances, and we need to be the checks. You know, the system in concept is you know, pretty impressive, but we need to hold people accountable. And in terms of the death penalty, you know, I've always personally had a problem with the death penalty, but even if you believe in an eye for an eye, the fact that a significant percentage of the time you might be wrong is called murder. So I personally don't see how that can't change your view of the death penalty unless you're willing to say, look, I'm not sure you did it, but we need to have a bad guy, so you're going to die. I'm sorry.
Well, this conversation has certainly probably opened the eyes of a lot of people who are unaware of this problem. Tony, thanks so much for the work that you're doing and for coming in. And Peter, thank you as well.